What is up, podcast people? Welcome to another day, another episode. We're here with the Pod Squad, and you guys know it's me, Josh, here with Kayla.
Hello.
We also got Riley in the house with us on the podcast. You guys probably don't know who Riley is, but I've known Riley since probably 5th, 6th grade, like all the way back then. So it's kind of weird. I have my new life here with my fiance, and then I have my old middle school, high school friend. Look, this is like
his
an
old life. You're dead to him
This
now.
is
We're like BC days. All right.
This is a surreal moment. I got my middle school and high school life to my left, and my future adulting right to the right. So this could be a fun podcast. But excited for today. Today we're going to talk about a topic super applicable. We had a beach retreat this past weekend. And it was awesome. So if you're listening and we're at the beach retreat, awesome. Shout out to you. But we did a live Q&A during that beach retreat. And we're going to now answer one of the questions we did not answer during that live Q&A. And that question was, how do I hold up my faith when surrounded by people who don't follow God? So that's what we're going to kick off this episode with how do I hold up my faith when I'm surrounded by people who don't follow God? Off the dome, what are y'all's thoughts when I throw out that question?
You wanna go first?
I'm not used to having 3 people on there now, so it's weird. Off the jump, obviously, I feel like people use the argument of like, well, Jesus sat with sinners and ate with sinners. And it's like, yes, but I think also if you're leaning in towards like, I can't hold up my faith around these people, that's a separate discussion of like, how deep is your faith?
Yeah, that's good. For sure. What about you, just off the jump?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that we'd have to unpack from that question of like, what is that question really going down that avenue of like, how do I be bold in my faith, or how do I witness to those people that might not know Christ? But if we're talking about boldness, Bible's also very clear that we have to be bold. And like you said, Jesus ate with sinners. And obviously we strive to have the confidence of Jesus, but we need that boldness. If it's talking about witnessing, there's something so special about holding up your faith in the sense of like, you know, in culture, we want, like, it's very daunting, especially now, society, social media, very daunting to share the gospel, share the good news, because everybody's like, oh, you're forcing religion down my throat, yada, yada, yada. But then also, if you experienced Jesus a little bit, you know how sweet his presence is.
Yeah.
And so you don't want to sit on the sidelines and watch your loved ones go to hell when you don't have the answer, but you know someone who does. So you want to share that. So
yeah, that's good. I think that's a very common thought process of being a Christian around non-believers is justified by Jesus sat with sinners, right? Because Jesus sat with sinners, and me, a Christian, I can hang out with sinners. But you got to look at what Jesus did when he was with sinners, right? When Jesus was with sinners, he didn't sin when he was with the sinners. And he also called sin out when he was with sinners. Like, Jesus didn't just sit there with his arm crossed and be like, hey, you guys good? Do what you want. Go love life. Like, yes, Jesus was in the presence of non-believers and at the same time pointed them to himself, right? He didn't affirm sin. He loved them enough to call them out on it. And he didn't sin with them and partake of whatever they're doing. So I think this question, or that lifestyle, if you will, that ball could roll 10 different directions of how do you hold up your faith when you're surrounded by people who don't follow God. Man, just off the jump, like, what do you mean by people who don't follow God? Like, are they your main source of community, or are they just people you work with, right? Are they your small group friends or your people that you go to for advice, wisdom, and counsel? I would not recommend them being your main influence of community. Are you putting yourself in that situation to be surrounded by sinners, then causing you to sin? So I would be very careful. And I get it, right? This is your best friend you had since 9th grade, or your best friend from work and is your coworker, and they want to invite you out to go drinking, but you don't want to do it. Like those things, you got to stand firm in those moments. So like, how do you hold up your faith? Is you hold up your faith. You don't sacrifice what you believe to just be in the community, which is why it's super important to have a biblical community at the same time.
Yeah, I would even say if you are even hinting, if you're in a position, you're putting yourself in situations where you know that your faith could be compromised at some point at that night, probably shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Probably shouldn't do it.
Yeah, for sure. And this means, man, this is the, right, bad company corrupts good morals. Like, yes, there's a balance to evangelize. But this is where it is, right? Are you going to your community or your non-believers to evangelize to them, or to just partake in the community?
Yep.
Two different heart postures, two different perspectives going into that moment. Your best friend since the 12th grade or 9th grade that wants to invite you out on a Saturday night that's going to cause you to sin. Are you going there to evangelize, to be a light, or to just hang out with them and be a part of it? Like, those are two different perspectives. And if you're just going there to be a part of it, to just, I'm lonely on a Friday night and have nothing to do, I would recommend you need to really focus on building biblical community and sever those friendships. Like, those friendships will cause you to pull you back 100%. You can deny it all you want. You cannot believe it all you want. But the Bible is telling us that those friendships will cause you to sin 1,000%. And the Bible doesn't play any games when it comes to, right, believers, people who bear the name brother, people who bear the name sister, Christians. It is very, very strong with, hey, find your local church, find those people, stay with those people. And if a non-believer comes into that circle bearing the name brother, bearing the, like, hey, I'm a Christian, but I'm not really a Christian, it tells them, like, it gives us very strict action to not even eat with them. Like, hey, if they're calling themselves a Christian but their actions are totally different, the Bible says in 1 Corinthians 5, give them over to Satan, give them over to their flesh so they can be dealt with. Like, no games with it. But then we're like, oh, but, I can share the gospel with them, or I can do that. Like, yes, you can, but are you doing it at the same time? So if that's how you want to justify hanging out with non-believers. And I get it. Like, and I don't want to come off in a Pharisee legalistic way. Like, I have friends who are not Christians 100%. But going into those moments, where's your perspective, right? Hey, am I going in as the light of the world to, when I'm with them, and every opportunity I get, I'm going to point them to Jesus? Or am I just going with them to grab another beer, right? So I think there's two different postures going into those moments, for sure.
Well, you touched base on, like, the affirmation aspect of it. And I feel like that's where a big part comes into it, is, like, if you're looking at holding up your own faith in that situation of hanging out with them, part of your faith is, like, not affirming certain things. And, like you said, to call it out. So, like, how would you then say that you have, like, a group of friends that are seeking that affirmation from you, and you're trying to hold up your faith? How do you go about that conversation with them?
Yeah, Jesus said, you be wise as a serpent, but innocent as a dove.
But, like, you've spent 10 years not talking to them about, like, calling out their
Oh, okay, I'm with you now.
You spent 10 years, you're not doing it. You're feeling the conviction. You're submitting anonymous things of, like, how do I hold up my faith hanging out with them? You hear this podcast, what do you tell them?
Yeah. Maybe if this is like a friend you've had since the 10th grade, and just now you're feeling
Riley.
It's Riley.
That's kind of where we're setting.
Well, Riley, there's something I gotta tell you.
I'm a Bible-believing Christian.
Man, but then you be honest, right? You go to that friend and say, hey, look, I know I even partaked in this. I know we hung out together, but there's just something stirring in me lately that is causing me to feel like this is not right. So because of that, I can't do that. Like, you don't have to lie. You don't have to try to think of a clever way to try to outsmart the other person to not make them feel bad. Like, you can just tell, love rejoices in truth, not in wrongdoing. Like, love them enough to tell them the truth. Like, hey, I know we hung out on Friday nights before. I can't do that again, and this is why. Right? And you just be very clear. And I picture that conversation not going in a way that's, like, confrontational and, like, I can't do this anymore and I'm super sorry I did this again. Like, please forgive me. Like, not in a very aggressive confrontational way, but just in a very calm, like, hey, look, I know we've done this before, but I just can't do it again, and this is why. And you don't have to overthink it, overcomplicate it, try to jump through 10 hurdles to outsmart the person into that conversation. Just be very clear.
And I think it also depends on how much time in between that 10th grade friend and the next time you see him. If it's like a year, 2 years, that non-believer should already see the fruits of Jesus coming out of you. They should see your persona completely do a 180. So I mean, if it's long time, your actions should be saying, like, okay, yeah, I gave my heart to Christ, but obviously if it's like a week later, you should probably have a conversation. Hey,
for sure,
this is not who I was this, but I'm not this now. I'm born again, new creation.
And that'll always change as you mature in your faith, right? As we're sanctification, right? As you're being made more like Christ, you're maturing in your faith. That means how you view sin, what is sin, and how serious you view sin is also going to grow, right? When I was, 16, 17, just now beginning a serious walk with Jesus, right? Cussing, okay, cool, whatever. 8 years later, like cussing, oh, big red flag. No, don't do that. Honor one another. Like, as you grow in your faith, what you view it. Now, the sin itself did not change, right? But how you view it and your perspective on it and how serious it is also going to change because you're being sanctified. So that means, like, hey, when I'm 16 and I have this friend group and I just became a Christian and cussing was something down the road, it wasn't a salvation issue. Like, I was just worried about the gospel, right? But now when I'm 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, cussing is a big thing. So that means that friend group I was with when I was 16, 18, 19 cussing, totally different ball game now. So as you grow in your faith and mature in your faith, also your friend groups are probably going to change as well. And they should, right? You're separating, you're in the world but not of the world, right? You are a spirit of God around people who are not following Jesus. Like, for sure, some stuff will change and your friend groups will change. But that also can pivot back to, okay, hey, then who am I going to hang out with? You need to find biblical community for sure. Can always pivot back to that.
Let's go back to the sanctification. If there's anybody who doesn't like, particularly if they have church hurt, and they don't like the Christianese, the legalistic, like religion terms, let's unpack that and sort of do a deep dive on like what sanctification looks like today. Yeah,
dude, I love that. And that's kind of what we're talking about a little bit on Monday night. The tradition, breaking the lie of tradition and religion. This is where the Pharisees and Jews come to Jesus, and Jesus, they're like, Jesus, why are you and your disciples eating without washing your hands first? Like, you're breaking the tradition of our elders. This is Matthew 15:5. You're breaking the tradition of our elders because you guys didn't wash your hands before you ate. And it was a big tradition with rabbis and religious leaders to eat with clean hands, to eat food, right? To wash your hands first. It wasn't a command from God. It was just a tradition they kept. And nothing wrong with washing your hands before you eat. So then Jesus flips the script on him and is like, hey, but you're not honoring your father and mother. A command from God. So you're valuing the tradition over the command. So like the Pharisees have this conversation with Jesus, and then Jesus pulls this crowd. He's like, hey guys, let me teach you something and understand this. And I think this is how Jesus approached the conversation versus how a Pharisee or kind of church, religious, super legalistic would approach it. Is, hey, I'm going to tell you this, and you need to do it without even questioning it. Like a Pharisee would, hey, you need to wash your hands before you eat. No questions asked. That's the tradition. Do it. Jesus comes along and is like, hey, let me teach you this. But he also says, understand it, right? Hey, I need you to learn this, understand it, digest it. Is that our 30-minute? No. Time to eat?
No.
Meal prep?
No.
But Jesus, and this goes back to sanctification, right? I think everybody growing up in church, if you've had some type of religious background or anything, it was, hey, do this, don't ask any questions, right? Hey, just don't sin, don't ask any questions. But as we look more at Jesus, he's like, yes, don't sin, but understand the reason why. So going to sanctification, it means to be made more like Christ. And I always picture a crock pot. That's the best image I could always think of it. Like a crock pot, you put it in the beginning of the day, like 7 a.m., 8 a.m., to eat it at like 8 o'clock at night. And you just put the food in, and throughout that 12 hours of the day, it's going to be slowly broken down to be made into the meal you want. Like when you're a believer on earth, it's not a microwave. Like when your justification is the microwave, like you're immediately saved right then. But the crock pot, if you will, is the moment you accepted Jesus till the day you die, you are in this Jesus crock pot, slowly being broken down, being made more like Jesus. So that means what you viewed as sin when you were 17, it wasn't a big deal when you're 17, but now, man, I'm 24. Like, this is actually because Jesus is now breaking you down, if you will, by your flesh, breaking your flesh down, forming you to be made holy, to be like him. So imagine you're in like a Jesus crockpot until the day you die, to be sanctified, right?
The title of this episode is Jesus Crockpot.
And the more the stuff gets broken down, right, even in a crockpot, the more you break down that food, is the more it's going to be softened, and the more stuff is going to be exposed, the more flavors are going to be there. Same thing when I'm 24 now versus when I'm 48. Something that I view now as it's not that big of a deal, it's whatever. But when I'm 48, I can guarantee you I can look back at my 24-year-old life and be like, bro, what were you even doing? right? But it's that idea of, man, as you mature, as you're being broken down more, what you view as sin is changing. So even now with the friend group question, when I'm 48 and when I'm doubling my life, I'm 48, the friend groups I have when I'm 48 can be totally different than when I'm 24. And the community I have, like I picture, I mean, looking at pastors here in the church, are just older people in the faith, people who are in their 80s, 90s, 100. Like their friend groups then, like what they have now, is probably like just 2 or 3 people that they are constantly like praying for, lifting each other up. Versus us now, it's like, hey, man, I need a group of 80 people to hang out with to be free on a Friday night to go bowling. So it changes over time as you're in that crock pot over time.
Yeah, and I think that's what we also have to keep into consideration. When we're 40, we're going to have completely different friend groups, like you said. So when you're around those non-believers or those brothers who claim, and sisters who claim that they're brothers and sisters, but they're not repentant of their sins, so they're playing God, playing Jesus, we have to realize that these people are probably not going to be in our lives longer than 2 years.
Yeah.
So are we going to stand up, stand bold in our faith with God? Because Jesus said, if you denounce my name in front of others, I'm going to do the same in front of my Father. So we have to keep that in mind. Like that is serious thing.
100%.
So we have to, hey, and that's super hard, especially us younger people. Like we feel, oh my gosh, my friend group is my identity. My friend group is my everything. I can do nothing without my friend group. It's so real to us. But when we're 80 years old, it's just going to be, most likely, it's just going to be our grandkids and our spouse. Yeah. And like, that's gonna be it.
And it's this beautiful balance. And like the balance to this, having friends that aren't Christians, is that you can still have a relationship and still have a friendship and not affirm the sin at the same time that you're with. And there's a balance to it. Like you can have the friendship, have the relationship, because without the friendship and the relationship, you'll lose influence to point them to Jesus. So you can have the friendship, have the relationship, but if at a point if that friendship and relationship continues to cause you to sin, because you're not pointing them to Jesus, you're just now partaking in it. Jesus played no games with that. He said, hey, if it causes you to sin, gouge out your eye, cut off your hand. Like the thing that is consistently causing you to sin, cut that out and get it out of your life and put it to death. But if you're able to have a mature faith, right, somebody who's strong in their faith, somebody who's matured in it a little bit, some deeper roots, that means you can have friendships and have relationships with people who are not believers and not stumble into the sin they are, but point them to Jesus. But you can only do that from a deep-rooted faith, right? If you're new to your faith and you go out hanging out with your friends on a Saturday night, you don't have deep enough roots to withstand that temptation. But when you have deep roots to withstand that temptation, you can have the friendships, have the relationships, and still point them to Jesus. Man, there's so many beautiful testimonies of just hearing people's story of that. Man, I had a friend when I was 20. And they never, they were Christian, they never wanted to hang out with me, whatever, because I was living in the world doing the thing. But then I called them up 5 years later, be like, hey, you were that one Christian when you were 20, and you told me not to do this, and you told me it was probably not the best idea, and I actually did it for 4 or 5 years, and now my life is terrible, and you're actually right. So tell me about this Jesus thing. So you never know, like down the line, what phone call you'll get or what text message you'll get from people. Like, hey, you were that one Christian who told me that getting drunk every night is probably not the best idea, or sleeping around was not the best idea. Like, tell me more about that Jesus thing, because you stood, like you held firm in the moment.
Well, it's like what we talked about before, to where it's like, imagine the day comes to where we're all giving in our account, and like this person that you were friends with for 10 years being like, why didn't you tell me?
Yeah.
Like, and that hurts, and like that is a personal role that you play in that. And it's like, why did you let me go do this? Why did you just look at me? But you yourself, you were feeling yourself up, and you didn't fill me in on what was going on. And I think like we owe it to the people that we love to like remind them every time, like, hey, I know I told you this last week, but really, really sit on it. Really, let me pray for you in this moment. And never stop praying for the people who are walking away, because you don't know when they're going to turn around. But it's just that moment that scares me, that like one of my close friends is going to be like, why didn't you tell me? And so I'm going to tell them every day now. And just go from there.
Yeah.
I had apathy a lot for that, because I was like, you know what, they're grown people, or they're in charge of themselves, they can make their own decisions. But it changed when I was in my prayer time. I asked God to break my heart what breaks his.
Yeah.
And that very same concept came up, was like your loved ones, these people, my children, are going to be absent, or not absent because he's omnipresent, but less in my presence. So, and that just, dwelling on that concept just absolutely broke my heart. And it brought another fire to be like, okay, another boldness to be like, keep, accept Jesus, change your life, keep going.
That's good. I mean, I think all these questions around that, of how do I be a friend? How do I be a friend around sinners? How do I be a Christian around sinners? How do I do this community thing? Be in the world but not of the world, will always point back to that balance. And if you want a scripture reference, John 8 and John 4, Jesus has these two moments where he's Jesus, he's God, like he's the master. He so masterfully and amazingly balances this line of loving the person and not affirming the sin at the same time. He loves both of the women in John 8 and John 4, loves them both, calls them out on their mess, but tells them to sin no more. Like this beautiful balance of, yes, it is possible to engage with people, to have friendships, to have relationships, and not affirm of the sin at all. And yeah, I mean, that's our goal, is to try to balance it like Jesus did. And because we're human, we'll never do it perfectly. But the same way you balance anything is that you got to balance. If at any point you check yourself leaning heavy on one side of like, man, I really want to love this person, so much grace, so much grace, so much grace, love the person, grace, 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 that means you are now neglecting the truth aspect of that balance of sin and love. Or you can go heavy on the other side of that balance, and it's so much truth, so much love, that you turn legalistic. And now you have no friends at all, because every time you just smack people with the Bible. Yep. So this balance of, hey, at any point, do I need to check myself? Am I getting too much grace, too much love, and not enough truth? Or so much truth, so much law, so much Bible, and there's no grace? Like Jesus did this perfect balance between grace, love, and truth. Like it's masterful, and that's the goal, to balance that. And I would say practically what that could look like is going to, like, having this conversation with your friend. Like, love them enough to tell them, like, hey, this is wrong. Like, hey, I don't want to hold your hand as you walk off a cliff. Like, hey, we can still be friends. We can still hang out. I just can't hang out like this with you anymore. Yeah. Right? I'm not saying you have to come to church with me. I'm not saying you have to read your Bible. Like, I'm saying that I cannot partake in this with you. And that's just it. And they'll notice, like, okay, hey, you're telling me you're not going to go out and get drunk with me or hang out with me or sleep around or send these pictures or whatever because of your beliefs. It's a whole different ballgame. Like, you don't have to try to smack people with a Bible. Jesus didn't. He didn't smack the woman caught in adultery with a Bible. He just said, go out and sin no more. So I would say, and you go to that friend group, those people, and you just very clearly, very honestly say, and this is your moment to be bold about Jesus. Say, hey, look, I can't do this anymore, and this is why. That doesn't mean you have to not be best friends. That doesn't mean you have to hate them. Now, how they may receive that information may not be the best. That ball could also roll in 10 different directions. They may be like, oh my gosh, you're a Christian, or you're no fun, you never want to hang out with us again, and da-da-da-da-da. 100%. It could be a very big reality. Or they could be like, hey man, I appreciate you sharing that. We don't have to do that anymore. Like, I won't cuss around you, or I won't, whatever. That conversation could go anyway, but you got to be very rooted in your identity to know however that conversation goes is not going to change who you are or what you believe in. But it may change your community because you're in that crock pot being sanctified, which is good. Any parting thoughts you guys have? No? Let's go.
His little head nods.
That was good.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, man. So as you're evaluating your community, who you're with, who you're hanging out with, check yourself. Hey, are you balancing this truth and love aspect at the same time? Grace and love. Loving the person but not affirming. Are there any friendships that you do need to cut off? And just self-evaluate that. If this community I'm in, am I partaking in it and partaking in the sin, or am I pointing people to Jesus when I'm about it? Do you have deep enough roots to be in those environments? So all things for you to self-evaluate as you navigate life. And then it's okay to have to cut off friendships. But I would say, man, don't ghost anybody. For like a 30-second nugget, don't ghost them. Don't just be like, hey, I can't hang out anymore, bye. Like, don't ghost them. Like, part of the reason of you being a follower of Jesus is pointing to the Jesus part. So before you ghost them and cut off those friendships, explain, hey, I'm about this Jesus thing now, so I can't do that. And then if you need to ghost them, make it happen. But at least clarify the reason why. Don't just peace out on people and start blocking them and ghosting them, but you should point them to Jesus first before ending that conversation.
And don't be super righteous about it either. Righteous is a good term in the Bible. However, in our culture, to be overly righteous and have that stigma where you're on the high horse, that's going to turn those non-believers off real
Take the
fast.
log out of your eye first.
Even Christians, that'll turn them off real quick. So
Yes.
just evaluate, pray to God if you want to go do that. Pray to God real quick and be like, hey, please lead this conversation. You've been tugging on my heart to go this way. Please lead that conversation for me. Let it be done in a rightful way that's pleasing and honoring to you. Don't come in there and be like, I'm better than you.
That's
You're
good.
dragging me down. Peace.
Yeah, that's good. You got to and that's the gospel part. That's your intro to the gospel. Like, hey, man, I get it. We hung out last week doing the same thing. Like, I was in the same boat, man. This sin stuff, I was right there with you. But look at Jesus, man. That's the whole gospel, right? Hey, I'm a sinner. You're a sinner. Like, we're in the same sin boat. We both need a savior. Man, that's a good piece. Take the log out of your eye before you take the speck out of your brother's. That's good. We'll appreciate you guys hopping on today. Our pod squad, Riley, Kayla, being here with us. Appreciate you guys tuning in. We'll be back next week, same time, same place, with another episode for you. Peace out.
Goodbye.
Boy.
Let's go.